Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Gospel of John. Our focus is the farewell discourse, chapters 13 through 17. Today, we are stepping back and looking at John 1 to set the context. The format, we're going to have several people talk. We're going to start with a presentation by Gary, and then we'll have Evanique, Ron, Becky, Penny, and others, Joe, talk about their take on John 1. We're going to focus from, just the first 5 verses, but the larger context is that of first 18 verses. Penny, could you read the first 18 verses of John 1? We'll start with that and we'll go from there. Penny, you need to unmute though.
Okay. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was light, and that light was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God.
Thank you. Thank you.
The last couple.
Go ahead.
The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testifies concerning him. He cries out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me before he was before me." From the fullness of his grace, we have all received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known.
Thank you, Penny. Next up is going to be Gary. Gary, go ahead.
All right, so I have my presentation ready. And is everybody able to see that okay?
Yes.
All right, and so I kind of, again, figured I'd do a little thing on, since the Logos is the most prominent idea in the first chapter of John, kind of like a brief history of the Logos. This wonderful man, Gordon Clark, began his philosophy textbook by saying it was born on May 25th, 585 BC at 6:13 in the evening. And so this is the actual, like sometimes they will point to this moment as the birth of Western philosophy, when Thales of Miletus successfully predicted an eclipse. And the significance of this is to describe natural phenomena in the terms of natural phenomena rather than attributing it to the gods. And so in that sense began a distinction between the idea of the Logos as something separate from the divine, and where it began to incorporate in its definition, all these ideas of reason and understanding and being associated with science and a kind of an early form of the scientific method. And so that began this distinction that's tentatively held to now, but it's like good to discuss, is the distinction between logos and mythos. And mythos being the stories that we tell, especially as they're about the gods and the divine nature, and logos being committed to a more rational understanding of the world, apart from attributing phenomena to divine. Heraclitus, 540 BC, his philosophy was an example of pure materialism. And so I have a quote, is like, this cosmos, which has not been made either by gods nor men, but was and is and ever shall be an eternal fire. And the pre-Socratics were really concerned about the substance of what the universe was made of. And for him, it was fire, which is kind of interesting, because when we look at it now for our modern scientific perspective, we see that matter and energy are just two phases, two states of the same thing. It's, energy converts into matter and matter into energy. And so, here at 540 BC or in the 400s BC, he wasn't so far off. And for him, the logos was like the central directive constituent in nature. And it has this idea of a proportion or a measure. And that sometimes in his definition, it's also the fire itself. So it's the energy and the matter, all of it together, which is where we're at here. It's like, it's the animating force of the universe and the universe's own constituent material. The Greek word logos, we're familiar with the word, as its basic definition. But as you go through it, it's computation, measure, value, explanation, law, reason, debate, utterance, tradition. And then much later, and I have a star there after wisdom, because that's just I was looking at Liddell and Scott, the Greek lexicon, and from what I could tell, its association with wisdom seems to be later. But I put a star there because I'm willing to entertain the possibility I'm wrong. That might have an earlier, provenance. And so by the time we get to the Stoics, logos also represents natural law. So when we think of the natural laws or the laws of nature, we have the idea of logos is there describing that. Up until Thales, and again, I have a little star there because I'm not a classicist, and some of this is up for debate, but truth was found in our mythologies, in the stories that we told. And so now we're beginning with Thales as we start to have inquiry into the natural world and talking about truth as distinct and separate and unexplained by mythos, or at least by the gods and the religions. Mythos began to be associated with the stories of the gods, but not necessarily truthful stories. And by the time of Plato, when they used the word mythos, it started to carry the idea of something that was fictional. And so it was really people were starting to become more and more skeptical of the import of truth in their stories. But like I say here, mythos and logos were never completely separated. Even as fictional stories, mythos continues to contain logos within it. Aristotle in his Poetics starts to talk about logos as one of the three constituent parts of a story alongside mythos and praxis. And so logos is the argument that the story is about, maybe the element of truth, whereas mythos becomes the plot of the story and praxis is the action of the narrative. And so, like I said, logos becomes associated with the truth within the mythos, within the story. In John 1, it says of the logos that through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. And that's in our section that we're looking at too, the first 5 verses. And in Proverbs 3, we see that it says, by wisdom the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding he set the heavens in place. And so in John 1, you have this really clear pointing towards Proverbs 3. and this identification with the Logos, with wisdom from the book of Proverbs. Again, we have, in John 1, the phrase only son, which I believe is, we have that in 1:18. That's the section where it says the only begotten son who sits in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. No one has seen God at any time but the only begotten son. And this, I'm sorry that I have it in Greek here, but it's monogenes, which genos means to give birth, and mono only. So it's like the only born or the only begotten is what's being communicated by there. Lots of times the translation will just say only son or the only one, but it's that firstborn kind of idea. And so in Proverbs 8, you have this pointing toward the Lord brought me forth as the first of his works before his deeds of old. And so again, it seems that this association with the Logos and wisdom and Jesus is all pointing back there and is signified in, it's like intentional nods, intentional verbal similarities for us to draw that connection. The word chokmah, which is the word for wisdom that we find in Proverbs, has, again, a lot of definitions. But one that we forget is it implies skill, like a craftsman. And so when the temple is being built and when they're building the tabernacle and they find weavers and metalsmiths, they're always looking for people with chokmah, with wisdom, this artisan type skill. Which takes us to another interesting thing is one of the traditions is that the Torah and wisdom are the same. And so when it looks at wisdom, we're talking about the Torah, and the two coincide with each other. In at least Midrashic Hebrew, they would take the book of Proverbs and juxtapose Proverbs with elements of the Torah so that they would comment on each other. And so they would use Proverbs as an interpretive lens of the Torah. Some verbal things is when God wrote the Torah, the same word for writing is to cut and divide, is the same word used for when God splits the firmaments and separates the waters above and the waters below. And so there's this idea of the writing of the law, and that the Torah is kind of there is the thing that God uses to create the created order. So there's this aspect of the Torah which is divine and generative. And so some have therefore equated wisdom of Proverbs with the Torah. Couple of other things as before we get even to Jesus, we have John 1 and Second Temple Judaism is in Enoch. Wisdom goes forth to dwell among the sons of men, but is not able to find any dwelling there, is rejected. And so we see the same thing taking place in John 1:11, as he came that which is his own, but his own did not receive him. So not only is there points to the sacred scriptures in Proverbs, but there's even to the mythology that's extra testamental. We find parallels there in the Gospel of John. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, these two scrolls that I have listed there are two versions found in separate caves. 1Q means cave 1 and 4Q means cave 4, of something called the War Scroll, where they talk about this eschatological battle with the sons of light and the sons of darkness. And so once again, originally they thought that this light and dark parallels, you see this so much in later Gnostic thoughts. They thought, oh, maybe John is linked with the Mandean tradition that we see later in the 2nd century. Here we have that same light and darkness going on in the Jewish tradition, in the Qumran scrolls in the Essene community, and that's before Jesus. And so the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. So this idea of light and darkness is there in John, as we also see parallels there. Oops. And so for me, what stuck out with regards to the Logos and John chapter 1 is that it casts a wide net. It seems like John is intentionally, it's not like the Logos is any one of these. He's using a word that has such a wide variety of meanings that he's able to cast a wide net that almost anybody who's used the logos in their tradition it's gonna hook them, and they're gonna want to see what's going on. And he comments on all of it in this one chapter. One of the main things that he does is he reunites mythos and logos. He's now starting to talk about the spiritual and the divine, and so it's no longer just a materialistic world. But the logos is functioning in the way that logos in the Stoic and pre-Socratics in Greek philosophical tradition, it's still functioning in the same way that it did. It's just now reinfused with the divine. Logos assumes the characteristics of Lady Wisdom from the Jewish wisdom tradition. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a lot to say about the divine feminine with regards to John 1, just because it's right there in the text. The logos is with God, asserting the truth of the stories of the mythos. And so again, it's the idea that logos has the truth and the mythos doesn't. By the reuniting them, they become joined again, and now the stories are now importing a truth once again. The logos is also that which creates the world and assumes the roles. I already mentioned this, that the philosophical tradition is ascribed to it. And then finally, as a narrative, if we're going to look at it from this Aristotelian thing, is now we have logos, mythos, and praxis all working together, all together in this one thing. But it's not just a story and how to write a good story. It's back to being a divine story. It's its own. It's a new mythos. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Gary. Next up, we're going to have Evanique, followed by Ron and Penny. Evanique, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was thrilled when we were going back to the beginning of John 1, because I really just think there's so much to give. And it's just starting with the beginning, like in my version, which is the New Living Translation, it says Christ, the eternal word. And I thought about it, and it's the eternal word, because words, it shows that this word, I think words have impact, just language wise. Like you say something to someone and it sticks with them. And that's why we take it so for granted. But when the title struck me as eternal word, that means it's not just in this world, it's spiritual. It's going to have a spiritual impact on you. So it's not just something that passes by. It's going to have an eternal, a lasting impact. And not only is it going to have an impact on you as a person, but it has an impact on this world. Now, whether you believe in Jesus or whether you don't, Jesus has been one of the most important figures in the world today. So, it's just, to me, when I saw that prologue, and normally I don't focus on the titles, like, normally they're not like impactful, but that really started to impact me. So that word eternal. And then it says in the beginning, the word already existed. And I was like, wow, in the beginning, the word already existed. And I go back to the Genesis story and how the world was created. It was darkness and desolate, and God created the world. And I go back to Jordan Peterson because I think it's talking about balance. And the reason why I think it relates is because I think Jesus is here to bring the balance, right? So if you look at it, it's order, like in the beginning, order versus chaos or creativity. And I looked at that and I was like, God was bringing order to chaos. But really, if you look at it, more so, it was working together. If you look at it, order versus creativity, it was like God was bringing the order into the world, and then and I think of chaos kind of as Christ, because we looking at him as kind of like the feminine aspect. He brings the creativity, he brings the beauty, he brings the, all the different colors, all the different ways. Because God could have just made a bland black and white world, made it survival for humans, but he brought the word, and the word was Christ, and Christ brings the beauty, right? So that's the way I thought of it. And then it says, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through Christ. And that's what made me think of Christ again being those words. That means he was I want to say creativity. I know Jordan Peterson uses the word chaos, and I understand that as well. But when I think of chaos as creativity, he brings the creativity. And God created everything through him. John says through him, through Jesus. So you think about it in the sense that I don't think Jesus was male or female at that point. He came into the world as a male form, but he was not male or female at that point. He was just God. So through him, I think of it as giving birth. And I had to explain that because otherwise it just sounds weird. But if you think about it, Jesus wasn't male or female yet. He gave birth to the world. And then he has to come and save the world. So it's kind of a beautiful thing. And then it says, and nothing was created except through him. Except through him. And of course, John is using the male form because that's what Jesus was on the earth. But if everything was created through him and everything went through him, it shows both sides of Jesus. It shows the masculine and the feminine. And it shows Jesus being the feminine through that. And then it says, finally in first, it says the Word gave life to everything that was created. And that's what made me also think of creation, and the creative force that Christ is. If you think about it, even when he came to this earth, he created a direct relationship between God and human beings. Remember, before in the Old Testament, only people of the Levite tribe, only priests actually of the Levite tribe had access to God. And it wasn't even direct then. It was just kind of like, it was a little bit of, I'm trying to look for the exact word, but it was kind of like you couldn't look directly at God. You had to go through the temple, you had to go through the cleansing, and even then you didn't fully see God. You only saw like a small portion of him. So if you think about it, he created a direct relationship between God and man through him, through through things like the transfiguration. And if you even think about, he went to death to die on the cross so that we could have eternal life. That's the story. He shows us, and he creates a new relationship. And then he says the Word gave life to everything that he created, and his life brought light to everyone. So he is the light. I know we were talking about the diamond and that God shines his light through Jesus, and Jesus is the diamond, but his life brought light to everyone. And I just thought about it, like, he's the reason why we have the light. And then finally in verse 5, it says, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. And that, to me, just signifies so much of who Jesus is. The darkness could never overtake him because he is light. No matter what he was going through, he is the light of the world, and the darkness of the world, everything that he's about to go through doesn't overtake him because it's who he is. It's the light, and he shows us, and he creates this relationship not only between us and God, but with us and the Holy Spirit, which is in us, and it makes us into the light. And if we focus on Christ, the darkness can never overtake us. And I think that's the overarching story. When we focus on God, when we focus on Jesus, which in a sense, if we're talking about center and periphery as well, we're focusing on who we are meant to be. The darkness can never overtake us. So that was my.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. Next up, we're going to have Ron, followed by Penny, and then Joe. Ron. Ron, let me see what's happened to Ron. Oh, Ron has stepped away. Okay, so let's start. Let's go with, let's see, is he back? Okay, he'll be back soon. Okay, next up is going to be, sorry, can you hear me? Okay, next up is going to be Penny. Penny, go ahead. I don't know what's going on. Penny, can you go ahead and unmute?
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I thought I was unmuted. Okay. And in this new international version, I thought they have an interesting summary of John. Birth and preparation of Jesus, the Son of God. In this gospel, John provides clear evidence that Jesus is the Son of God, and that by believing in him, we may have eternal life. John also provides unique material about Jesus's birth. He did not come into being when he was born because he is eternal. God became a human being. And I thought that was interesting too, because having been brought up on the story of Christmas and, you know, Jesus being born, sometimes you kind of forget that he didn't just come into being when he was born as a human being. He had already existed. And they talked a little bit here about the word of logos too. How was he using the word logos? The word was a term used by theologians and philosophers, both Jews and Greeks, many different ways, which Gary had told us a little about already. In Greek philosophy, the word was the principal reason that governed the world, or the thought still in the mind, while in Hebrew thought, the word was another expression for God. John's description shows clearly that he's speaking of Jesus, a human being he knew and loved, but at the same time, the creator of the universe, the ultimate revelation of God, the living picture of God's holiness, the one in whom all things hold together. To Jesus readers, the word was God was blasphemous. To Greek readers, the word became flesh was unthinkable. To John, the new understanding of the word was gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. I just thought that was interesting to kind of point out the two big groups of people, the Hebrews and the Greeks, that would have been reading this, and that for both of these groups, actually, this was a unique idea that Jesus, that Logos created the world, and that Logos became flesh. And it was just really a new creation, they're saying, that John put in his gospel.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Penny. Let's see. Next up is Ron. Ron, go ahead.
Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
All right. One of the things that I wanted to really strive on this one is Jesus here is claiming to be God. It's not that he is it's in his logos, his divine presence, that he is claiming to be actual deity here. It's very difficult. If we don't get this, we will not get the rest of it. That's all I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ron. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Wow, I'm a little bit unprepared, I must admit myself, here. But in the beginning was the Word. To me, this is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So what does this mean to me? This means that God in Christ, his Son, is something that exists outside of time, outside of its creation itself, so that outside of time and space, and it essentially allows us to understand this is kind of, to me, the beginning of consciousness itself. And the Word is something that allows us to bring things into consciousness, and that God is both the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and that's the divinity that exists within within Christ, and that not only exists within Christ, but I'm also in kind of thinking about this a little bit more, that exists in every single one of us, so that we're children of God, so that there is an element there very much that reminded me of the Gita, of seeing the God in everyone, that there is a spark of divinity that exists in each and every individual, so that through things, all things are made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. That everything that is truth, that is real, so to speak, goes through God. So that's where we can start to say, I think of, again, this idea that if we think that everything that what Christ represents is the truth and what he says is the truth, then that allows us to have what Evanique was saying, some order to the world, and that there's an order and there's a truth that we can follow, as opposed to, and that there's darkness and there's light. And in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. That light shines in the darkness, and that darkness has not overcome it. As well as, again, this allows us to understand, when I do think of this as in terms of center and periphery as well, is understanding that Christ is the center, and as we move towards Christ, that we're moving towards the truth, and moving towards what is good, and we can determine what is good based off of this. I also think of this in terms of just plain language as well, how words bring things into consciousness and allows us to understand what something is. If you think about it, what a word does, it can convey so many different concepts that allows us to understand what the world, what being is. So for me, that's essentially where I look at this as well. I know that wasn't as beautifully spoken as I wished it to be, but anyway, it's that's where I am for now. Anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Folks, I do have things to say. If anybody else wants to comment on John 1 verses 1 through 5, you're welcome to type an exclamation mark. And then I'm going to go ahead and make my presentation. Paul, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really a question. I'm not prepared to comment.
Then questions
okay?
we'll do after.
Okay, I'll do that after. Okay, thank
After
you.
everybody has presented, then you can go ahead and do questions.
All right, thanks.
What the structure is that everybody says things, and then people get to comment on anything anybody said or ask questions. So that'll be the second phase. Next up is going to be Katie. Katie, go ahead.
I really enjoyed Gary's presentation because he brought in the richness of that logos has so many different meanings that I find for me the best word for that I find is God's plan, logos being the word plan, because he has foresight. He's saying that he's thinking into the future with foresight. It wasn't just merely an accidental act of creation. And I liked also that Joe was talking about the beginning. It's like the beginning of what? It's like the beginning of the universe, the beginning of time, and God's outside of time. And what Penny said as well about especially if you grow up in a Christian household, it does focus on the birth of Jesus to a virgin. But I agree with what she's saying, that it's like he's coming into the world in the image of God and the likeness of God, just like we're born in the likeness of God. So he's coming into the human flesh.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a presentation on this. Let me try. Give me just a second here. Okay. Let's see here. Go for this. All right. Joe, can you see the screen?
I can.
Okay.
Sorry about the delay.
No problem. All right. So let's go ahead. Give me just a second here. Hold on. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead. So firstly, I'm going to make some disclaimers, and then I'm going to speak without any disclaimers. So first, all the disclaimers. I did not grow up in a Christian society, so I do not have the rich background that all of you folks have. I'm very new to the Bible. I started reading the Bible only about a year ago. I'm still going through it, so it's very, very new. I read Aquinas commentary, and my immediate reaction to Aquinas commentary on these 5 verses, there is 50 pages of his commentary, is that, that is actually speech. What I do is babble. So this is really very poor attempt to grapple with this incredibly deep text. At the same time, in the Indian tradition, trying to speak your best is not bad. Naneshwar, whose commentary we used for Gita, also said, look, all I can do is babble the truth. The truth. But at the same time, anybody who is trying to, like a child who is babbling excitedly about something, parents like that. Parents love that. So with all those qualifications, I'm speaking, and I'm going to now speak without any qualifications, trying to grapple with this deep subject. Okay. So first, I want to start with the concept of God. This is God the Father. And here is the word. Can't understand this, understand the Gospel of John without understanding God so loved the world. That is fundamental to it. So I'm going to draw the world first. Again, I'm going to I'm presenting everything in visual form here. Here, I'm going to draw. Okay, this is the world. Now the way, and this is God the Father. God the Father is light. Also spirit. Okay, this is matter. And I'm going to use this very unusual term here. So there is light and glass. I'm going to call matter glass. All right. Now, just to give you the perspective here, the world, I'm saying that, people are standing like this. It's the world inside. Okay, this is a glass sphere. The world, all 8 billion of us are in here. Okay, everything inside the circle, this entire area, this whole area is the world. Okay, so that is the world, and that is God. Now, I want to draw something here. This is the word. Think of it as a light-filled diamond. Okay, let me see if I can move this. I'll put it over here. So this is the word. Okay, and what I'm saying is that light-filled diamond. So the world is matter. Matter, the word matter comes from mother. And there is God the Father. This is the Son. This is light-filled diamond. This is spirit filling, expressing itself in matter. Another name for it is life. So this one is function, this one is form, and this one is life, where it is functionated form. Okay. Now let me read, now let me jump directly into this. Now I see John 1 as actually capturing the entire story. It's just incredible how it does it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Okay, so let's look at it part by part. Okay, all things were made through him. So we are shapes like this, made out of glass, okay, of matter. We are made through him. So it's firstly this light that is coming. This is the love of God. This is the grace of God raining down on the world, on all of us. That's the light. Light coming from God is grace. The light is coming through the word. The word completely encapsulates the light. Okay, so if you can go to no one has seen God. No one has ever seen God. This is 18. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. So you see the diamond, the light is in the diamond. As the word says, the Father is in me and I'm in the Father. So the Father is in me. So the Father, the light is in the diamond. And whatever light you're seeing, you are seeing through the diamond, but it is the light of the Father through him. He is God. He is light. The word is God. The word is light. The word is also man, is also diamond. His light-filled diamond. All things were made through him. So all of this, before you do anything, this is what you are made of. You're made out of the diamond. Now, we are here. There is light, there is grace raining on us. Now, I want to use a concept here from Gita. So you are here. Let me see, make it a little bit lighter here. Let me see here. Okay. You are here. You have three ways you can look. You can look this way. You can look this way. Or you can look this way. This Gita calls tamas. This is saying no to God. This is being angry at God. This is being lazy. Most people go sideways. They get enamored by the glass that they see around them. They get focused on the flesh. They focused on the periphery. That is what this direction is. And that is in Gita, it's called Rajas. And the third direction is Sattvic. That is pursuit of truth, pursuit of light. You look at the light. Now so those are the three different, when you look at the light, you're basically reflecting the light of God. The grace comes to you, but you have to love God back. You have to love light back. That is the Holy Spirit in you. And when you do that, you have life, or you have spiritual life. You have the living water in your heart when you are looking through the word at God. The word is the way. Jesus is the way. That he's showing you the path. So those are the three directions that are possible. This is the negative direction. This is actual saying no. Darkness is simply you turning your back on God, back on light. Because when you are looking this way, all you see is darkness. And you become dark. When you look this way, towards light, you become light-filled. When you look this way, you have maybe snatches of darkness and lightness temporarily, depending on what you're looking at. Okay, so those are the three directions that are possible. Okay, let's continue. In the beginning was the Word. Now, I'm looking at the entire story. And I have slight, I love this text, but what I'm trying to do is that now I'm trying to recapitulate it as a whole story. In the beginning was the Word, but the Word is now. So I prefer from the beginning is the Word, because it's always been there. It was there in the beginning, but it continues to be there. It continues to be there when it becomes flesh, when the Word becomes flesh, and when it goes back to God, it continues to be with God and is God. So I would say, to summarize the whole gospel here, is that from the beginning is the Word, and the Word is with God, and the Word is God. Now let's look at words. I mean, the thing is that each of these words is so incredible. Look at the word with. What does that mean? Okay, it's very profound. What is going on here is that, you see, this word here is with God there. What does that mean? That there is the Father and there is the Son, and there is light going between them. Just like God loves the world, God loves the Son. So that is the light of the Father going to the Son. And Son loves the Father. That is, it's going back. And that Son loving the Father is the Holy Spirit. So right in the beginning here, we have the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost all there together. So the Holy Ghost is simply this, simply the movement of Son, the love of Son for the Father. Or if you want to put it in visual terms, it is the Son reflecting the light of the Father. The light is reaching Father for the first time with the Son. The light is reaching the Father back through the Son. It is like self-consciousness of the light. It is consciousness of the light. Word is beautiful. It has an internal component of inner consciousness and an outward expression, just like a diamond with light inside. There is reflection taking place inside, where the source of light is getting light from the diamond. The Father is getting this love from the Son. And the light is streaming out, lighting the world. It is streaming out from the diamond, lighting up the world. So we are getting the light through the word being spoken externally. Both these are happening at the same time. Let's take the word with again. Yes, the Word was with God. But did the Word ever stop being with God? When he came to earth, he was with God throughout the entire time, even at his worst moment. Just for a moment, when he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Had God forsaken him? No. Had he forsaken God? No. Even at that moment, even when he took on all the darkness that the world has to offer, when he took on all of us looking in all these directions, he took all of that on to him. So for a moment, it appeared that he had lost the connection, but he hadn't. So the Word is with God. And he is God because he is light. He is the diamond, but he is light. He is light-filled diamond. He's both spirit and matter at the same time. He is both function and its form at the same time. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So all these things that we see around us, including ourselves, are made through him. So in that sense, we are children of God. In creation, we are children of God. In him was life. Life is nothing but spirit and matter combined. It's the Son of the Mother and the Father, matter and spirit. He is life. In him was life. In him is life. And the life is the light of men. So that life is a demonstration. He is a prototype for us. So he is the light, he is the way, he's the prototype for us. Light shines in the darkness. All that is light. It's when you look away from the light that there is darkness. So darkness is nothing. And it is shining, the light is shining in the darkness. And the darkness actually cannot overcome the light. If you just look at how light works and darkness works, darkness is simply where there is no light. There was a man sent from God. So this is a man sent from God, came through the word, whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light. So what he's saying, what is John saying? John is saying that, look, you guys are looking this way and this way. Stop that. John's baptism through water is simply saying, don't go this way and don't go this way. Give that up. Why? Because he wants to make straight the path of the Lord. He is saying, don't go here, so you can go here. That's what John is. John the Baptist. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light. So he's saying, don't go here, don't go here. This is coming. This is coming. The diamond is coming down on earth. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. So this diamond is actually going to come into the world here. Okay. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. Now, to know, what does know mean? Know means to see, to actually focus on the truth. No means looking in this direction. To put it in a very dramatic way, most people are flatlanders. You might have read the book Flatland. They only know this dimension. They just know, they think the world is like this. They're two-dimensional creatures. They do not know that there is a direction up. Or even if they kind of know it, that's not where they look. Most of their life is living in this dimension. What the word does is that he is the beacon. He's saying, look, there is a third dimension. There is a spiritual dimension to you. That's what the whole message is. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. Now, again, own here is people who claim to know these people, but in one sense, everybody is his own people. And they're all made through him. Everybody is his own. But that's the grace given to you, that you are made through him, you are his own. But you have to say yes to complete the cycle. That is the Holy Spirit. But to all who did receive him, so who said yes, who reflected that light, just like he reflected the light from the Father, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us, and we have seen his glory. Now, what is glory? Glory is this light-filled nature of the diamond. It is something that stands out in beauty, in truth, in power. It is concentrated. It is a high index glass with incredible facets to it that is capable of actually making everything else. It's the universal principle. It is the logos. It is the law of universe. It is the law of human beings. It is the law that produces all this amazing variety that we see. All the colors are there in the diamond. All the colors. It has the white light. It splits it into all kinds of directions. And all of that glory, all of that shining splendor is there. And that is what is glory. We have seen his glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him, and he cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." John, over here, was created through the Word, just like everybody else. So the Word was before him. And he's going to come after me. So that means he's going to come to the earth after. So that is what is before and after. For from his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. So grace is nothing but this light. The light just rains from him. And you can see that in the gospel, is each word that he speaks, everything, all his actions. There is grace through his person that reigns on everybody around him. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. He has made him known because he is 100% God and 100% man. He has made it accessible. Now, I want to connect this up with the farewell discourse. What is happening when Jesus washes his disciples' feet? So here is Jesus. He knows his time has come and that he is going back to the Father. So what does he do? There are his disciples, all of them. What he is doing by washing their feet is that he is showing them how he loves his Father. So he's transmitting the love that is between him and the Father to them. So the light, and that is the reflection of the light. So that is your ability to actually love God. And how is he doing that? By actually loving people here, his disciples, showing them that they can love each other. And through that act of love is the same as reflection of light. So he's transmitting, it's like you can look at it as light. So this diamond is transmitting how to reflect light to his disciples. And they are going to go and show it to other people so they can come back over here to God. And that's what I think the gospel is about. All right. So now, anybody who wants to comment about anything that anybody said is welcome to do that. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Okay, we'll start with Joe, followed by Gary. Let's go with Gary first and then Joe. Gary.
I was hesitant because I was giving other people an opportunity to speak firt.
No, please,
But,
no, I do want to hear what you have to say. Go ahead.
The first thing I wanted to say was it's nothing to apologize for not having a background in Christian thought. In fact, you get to come at it with fresh eyes and a different perspective. And so I find whatever you have to say is very enlightening. My old self from 10 or 15 years ago would want to correct your theology every step of the way. And that's me not being able to see the light because I'm not, not being open to that. But so in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that I really enjoyed it. The importance, I like that we're returned to the prologue, because John keeps throwing clues to us throughout that he expects the reader to already be familiar with some aspect of the story. He mentions in chapter 2 already that Jesus is going to die and that he's already referring to the resurrection. And so it's like he's just assuming that the reader already knows it. And so this prologue, these first 18 verses are the entire Christian gospel, in a nutshell. And then everything that's going to flow afterwards, he kind of tells us that if we had a record of all the books everything Jesus did, all the books in the world wouldn't fill it. So he's selecting stories that people might find familiar or similar to what they might already know, and he's using it to expand theologically the importance of what he's already established in the prologue. I kept like making little notes, and I couldn't possibly go through all of it. I really like what you were saying about the self-consciousness. It really reminded me of Hegel, because that's his idea of what he thinks happened with the birth of Christianity is that the entire universe is this conscious entity and became conscious of itself and became conscious of its own freedom. I was thinking, if we're going to go back to the wisdom tradition, and this relates so much to what you were saying, is in Proverbs 9:12, it says that wisdom is its own reward. And so the idea of looking into the light and to looking at Jesus, the idea of in Proverbs, the theme is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but it also implies that when we pursue knowledge, we're showing respect and deference to God in that. And so that we're back to this parallel thing that you're pointing at is if I study the world, recognizing that it was created by Jesus, then that becomes itself an act of worship. And that is, I'm actually looking inward in that sense, in that wisdom tradition. It's like the artisan, it's the skill craft, it's everything we do is the study of God, and is potentially an act of worship when we see that it came from God. And so anyhow, I really appreciate what you had to say there, because the new eyes, the new perspective, if I can like reel it in and just like not feel like I have to correct this guy for everything he says, just realize that that's exactly what John is doing. And that's why when I did my little presentation on the Logos, is he's giving all of it, but he's speaking in the language, he's casting that wide net. And I kept wondering to myself, is like, if John was more familiar with the Mahabharat or some of the more Eastern traditions, no doubt he might have been somewhat. What would he have said? How would he have phrased it? Would he have used different words? If he wrote his gospel, for those in India, what would it have looked like? And that to me, it sounds really exciting. And so thank you, Shrikant. And yeah, I could go through and comment on Joe and Evanique and the other one. I really liked Evanique's statement on especially when she started talking about the eternal word. And that's anyhow, I'm just going to stop there and let other people speak, but just thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Gary. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Katie. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, my one comment that I would kind of like to expand upon is that the idea of the word is the ability that you are self-aware, that you're understanding, and that you have a concept of self and you have a concept of the other. And I think you did lay it out beautifully, is that then from that that concept of self, that you can start to understand the world around you as well. I really liked what Gary had just mentioned, and I was kind of thinking the same thing as far as the pursuit of knowledge and the light, because then you can kind of see God in every action that you take. That means that you start to see if you start to see God in every action that you take, then you start to you're open to wisdom, to the truth, and you're constantly in pursuit of the truth, and you're in constant pursuit of the light, and you're moving towards the center, as you so beautifully had illustrated. and you're moving away from darkness. And I can think of this in so many different ways. This is so important. It's the importance of understanding oneself in that process is really critical. So you're not only self-aware, but you're also understanding what who you are and how you should act in the world. And it's liberating. There's a liberating act. And people that only, if you kind of look at things from a very narrow perspective, never necessarily get that. And there's a constant turmoil that starts to exist. And it manifests itself in many different ways. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about this is that you're using, you're seeing God in every action. You're using words to bring truth into your life, and that have this idea of self-consciousness and awareness. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. I just want to connect up one thing that Gary said and you said. For example, in the Indian tradition, the equivalence of what what the foot washing is the idea of namaste. Because when you're saying namaste, you're saying the God in me is greeting the God in you. So you're going to the center of you. You're going to your capacity to love the truth, to love God. That's what, the God in you means in the Indian tradition. And then you're saying God in me greets the God in you. So it is that the same idea of love, moving from your center to your center. So it is your capacity of reflecting the light, and that is greeting the capacity on the other person of greeting the light. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Katie. Katie, go ahead.
I'm hoping making sense when I'm explaining my thoughts, but I find it interesting, like Gary's saying, to find it familiar with before, like why didn't, kind of thinking, because it almost seems like a reiteration of Genesis, because Genesis already tells the story of creation, and here I feel like the emphasis really is on Jesus. Like, because if I think of like Jesus, the metaphor of Jesus as the Word, in the beginning was Jesus with God, and Jesus was God. He was in the beginning with God. Like, so it for me, it feels like the emphasis really is on Jesus and Jesus's role in creation, and kind of introducing Jesus in this Godhead. That's how I see it. Otherwise, why wouldn't they just left it? Why wouldn't they just have left it with the Genesis account of it?
Excellent. A great point, Katie. Aquinas has a beautiful commentary on that in his introduction to Gospel of John. What he says is that John is the eagle. He is approaching everything at such a deep philosophical level. What Genesis is doing is that Genesis is listing the various things that the God is creating. Whereas John says just that statement, all things were made through him. Through Logos. So there is Logos, which is spirit that is able to transform matter. So there is the light, there is Jesus Christ, and then there is everything. So it is dealing with things at a higher conceptual level, higher kind of contemplative level than the presentation in Genesis. Thank you, Katie. Becky, you didn't have a chance to talk about this before, so please go ahead and say whatever you want to say. Go ahead.
Okay. I loved what you said, Shrikant. That was very beautiful. So I really liked how John goes from in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God he was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So it's moving from something so abstract down to the concrete, and everything that we touch, feel, see, taste, it's all through God. But with the introduction of sin, a lot of that was lost. Like we got so locked in with the concrete because of I guess the curse to be stuck toiling the land and just living off our labor, and that separation from the spiritual, the abstract. And so when Jesus comes down, and the word became flesh, it was an act of recovery. I'm back here to come into your space of the concrete so that you can see me, taste, and really perceive. And through him coming as man, we can then move back to that abstract. And so it's giving the chance to have the world recognize him. And that's, I think, largely why he speaks in parables, because we understand stories, and behind those stories, if they have their minds opened, and they're willing to see or embrace the truth, then their own minds would not be fighting them to themselves to embrace that abstract concept of the parables that Jesus brings. So yeah, that I think this is beautiful. Thank you again for going through this.
Thank you. Thank you, Becky. I was reading the book of Job, and throughout the Old Testament, and this is far more intense in Job, this is a man asking God. He, in a sense, answer to Job is Jesus. Jesus actually shows people what it means to love God. What does it mean to follow the right way? It becomes so much easier because if you look at the Old Testament, people are trying to figure out, even people with so much integrity as Job are trying to figure out God, and they can't see God. Jesus is the intermediary. He's the middleman. He's the one that is actually the connector between God and man, because he's God and because he's man. So thank you. Next up is Joe, followed by Gary. Joe.
So something that Becky just said that made me think about when she talked about how going from the abstract to the concrete, made me think about a little bit about Aristotle's four causes as well, and how the material and efficient is the concrete, and the formal and the final is kind of the abstract. And we've kind of lost going in between both, and then only seeking things that are the concrete. then is kind of is moving us away from the spirit, the spirit of things. And in a way, you kind of drew that out when you're talking about the function and the essence of something as well. And I think that's true, is that if we only think about things that are just in front of us, instead of the purpose as to why we're doing it in the first place, the spirit of something, then we're moving away from God. And if you think about it materialistically, that's true. You're moving away why you do something in the first place, and understanding what you're pursuing. And that came to mind when she, very beautifully had linked the abstract and the concrete connection with the verse. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. So what I would say is that the word is the formal cause. What it is doing is that, it says, for the law was given through Moses, the grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So what law is basically, what do you do? It is instructions for you how to do it. What happens with the New Testament? The locus moves inward. You have the love in your heart. You have the way, you have the concepts, you have the abstract, you have it internally, you have an internal compass, you have a conscience, and you refer to that. You have this living water in your heart, which you can go to. So that the instead of doing things which are right in the external world and making sure you do that, that's huge. That is really crucial. But with Jesus Christ, you get the conceptual way, you get the love of truth. You get the grace, you get the beauty, all of it. So it moves the locus inward. That's how I see it. Next up is Gary.
I'm going to work really hard to try to make sense here. First off, I wanted to say, I really like what Becky had to say. It's so many times, especially in Christian circles, they get caught up in the notion of sin. And when Becky brought up, the idea that we're stuck in this world and we can't even see God. And so there's this idea is that sins are a consequence of our alienation from God, is that once we're alienated, there's nothing left but this material world. And so we're just stuck looking at the periphery, or looking at we're not even capable of turning in and looking at the light. And so it's just so beautiful when she talks about Jesus becoming manifest in this concrete thing in a form that we can see, because that's all we can see. And then in that form, revealing God. And so I just wanted to say thank you, Becky. That part of that was just really beautiful. And I like how you linked it to Job, because if you're reading Job, then you're paying attention that it's these cycles of discourse. And when Job has opportunity to speak, I haven't tabulated every single one yet, but I went through it. Is he's always asking for a mediator. He says, God's far away, and what's going on here? And he's like, I need somebody to mediate between us, because who am I to go to God? And the ironic thing is when God answers, he asks Job to imagine that a mediator was there, and he's like, well, suppose there was one. Is he going to make me go to jail? What's he going to do? Does he have the authority to make me do anything? And so he like lists like if you were going to have a mediator, they'd have to be qualified. It's the court of rule of law. You bring, you're making an accusation, right? And so that's the beauty of John, is that the logos is there. He's concrete. He's the mediator that Job is specifically asking for, and he's divine. Like if there was an accusation to be brought up against God, he could actually do it. And so like all the criteria that are being like laid out there are just kind of like are spelled out, and so that it was all just so beautiful. An addendum, which is just kind of a funny thing. Job begins with the Satan, and the Satan that's a legal term for like the prosecuting attorney. It's an accuser. And so then he has these friends that sit there, and they do a really good job for the first week when they keep their mouths shut. They don't say anything. And then as soon as they open up their mouths, all they do is they actually become Satan to Job. All they do is accuse him, saying that he's wrong when we know that he's not. And so like the beautiful thing is that when you get to the farewell discourse, we have another legal term, is the paraclete is the word that's used for the Holy Spirit. And he's the opposite of the prosecuting attorney. He's the advocate. He's literally, it's some translations call him the advocate. He's there on your side. He's the public defender. And he does for Job what his friends failed to do, is there as the friend. So yeah, just the whole relationship of Job to Jesus, to the farewell discourse, it's beautiful. So thank you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And I absolutely agree with Becky. I mean, that, the abstract and concrete together, the function and form together, where you can actually see it. And that's also the point that Gary, you made with moment you say that the world is made, everything is made through him. Suddenly everything around you becomes important, and you start looking for universal principles in everything that you see. Every human being is a child of God, and you're treating people and you're approaching people that way, and that is completely transformative. So it's just beautiful, this kind of union of spirit and matter, form and function. Wonderful. Now Paul had a question. Paul, please make whatever comments you want and whatever questions that you have.
Thank you. Wonderful evening, Srikant. You didn't disappoint, as you never do. And your thoughts meshed with a lot of the stuff we've talked about before. And I was thinking of the Gita and Krishna, and his stance in the world compared to this description of Jesus' stance. But that isn't my question. My question is very kind of naive. So it relates to the historical context that I think Gary was so well versed on, which is the thing that Jesus came into, according to John, or according to history, a situation where the paradigm of God as man manifesting the word was unaccepted, and that is the paradigm that the Messiah was viewed to be, but he just wasn't it? Or was it that isn't the paradigm at all? What they were rejecting, those who rejected him, were that there was a view of a Messiah as more of a man, a powerful king, and this whole concept of God as man. It's sort of like, my question is, how new was that at this moment versus in the historical context? Maybe it's not a valid question, but that's my question. Thank you.
Excellent question. Go ahead, Gary. Would you like to answer it?
So if I understand the question is how common was the idea that God could be man?
And that the Messiah was that. That was the definition of the Jewish Messiah. Was that the definition? That's my question.
In at least the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's some discussion of two messiahs. And so there's the idea of a kingly Messiah, and then there's a idea of a suffering Messiah. And so the combination of the two being one are difficult. It's like, people want to choose one or the other, I was actually I taught a Bible study class, and I talked about Eastern logic, where you have a tetralemma instead of an Aristotelian dilemma, and that the way of thinking is just sometimes very different, and so it's presenting something cognitively unusual. There's this guy Andrew Byers wrote a book a couple years ago. I believe it's called Ecclesiastical Theosis or something to that effect. And so the idea of a unity with God, and that the nation of Israel sharing a unity that's almost like a divine presence within us, where we become and reflect it. That was common. And so there's this idea that in the Gospel of John is that Jesus is appealing to that, especially in John 8, when he talks about I and the Father are one, is this aspect. What he's talking about is originally something, he's using their own language about his unity with the Father. And then he takes it a step further where he says, I am God. So it's that was one of those, in a short form, that was a distinguishing characteristic, this idea of monotheism. And so it was a hard pill to swallow, but at the same time, there's this idea of unity with God, which was common in Jewish thought. But certainly, like you have divine kingship all throughout the Near East, and that was the whole idea of Son of God is an appellation that was ascribed to Caesar. And so when you see Son of God throughout the Gospels, keep in mind is we're making this divine claim. It's beyond there. It's also a kingship kind of claim, because that would have been common in the thought there. I don't know if that adequately answers your. There's no quick, this is the answer, but that's the best that I can come up with.
That was huge. That was very illuminating. I know it's subtle. It's not a simple thing, but thanks for all the context. That's what I wanted. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. All right. I just want to say, it is actually quite a profound idea. It is very similar, if I wanted to use an analogy, it is very similar to what the founding fathers did in America as compared to the entire European tradition. The European tradition at a political level, this is the spiritual level. Just like founding fathers said, before founding fathers, most of the Western thought is saying that king is the only one who can rule, and the power goes top down from people who are aristocrats, who have, these are special people, and everybody else is basically garbage, and they have to be ruled. Founding fathers turned it on its head, saying all men are created equal, and they are endowed with it. It's exactly opposite of that. It's the same kind of thing that is happening here in Jesus, where you're saying when he's washing his disciples' feet, there is it's a profound statement about that we are children of God. So everybody was expecting him to be a king, of having the same kind of a position. And here he is washing people's feet. So it's a revolutionary idea. All right. I would love to hear more. Evanique, what do you think? What do you think? Evanique, are you there? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, I had to step away for a second.
Sure.
But I think tonight was fascinating. I loved your presentation, Sharikot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still absorbing all of this, because this is the way you put it. I'm going to have to go back and watch it again to really be able to respond. So I apologize for not being so responsive, but
no problem. No problem.
I'm going to have to really absorb it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Does anybody else want to bring anything up? Okay. What we're going to do, so we're going to continue with Joe. Go ahead.
Yeah, something that I just, kind of I thought about too is this, and it goes to the idea of being self-aware, is the ability to reason as well. And that's something that the word allows us to do. It allows us to reason. And that allows us to seek, again, that allows us to seek truth, to come to some logical conclusion about something. And so if you accept the Christian proposition that everything goes, that Christ does everything perfectly and God through God, or with God, then it allows us to come to reason as to how to seek God and how to find God. Anyway, that's just some thought.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think this self-consciousness, I mean, the thing is that it's amazing to see that, I'm going through the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament, you see this moving progression of the amount of self-consciousness increasing over time. A giant step is with Solomon, for example. Everybody before Solomon is asking for specific guidance. Tell me what to do. That's what they're asking. What Solomon asks for is wisdom. So you have these kind of precursors to Jesus in the Old Testament. It's really, really fascinating. Let me see. Alan, did you have a point? Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
This is very deep, and I think I would just confuse the topic.
Okay.
Very interesting for me, but
Fair
thank
enough.
you very much.
You're new, so I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I have to go pretty soon.
Sure, sounds good. Next up is going to be, let's go with Jason, followed by Evanique and Gary. Jason.
Great. So Shrikant, again, just to echo everyone's comments, that was a fantastic presentation. Even more impressive that you've only been reading the Bible for like a year. I mean, it's absolutely amazing the amount of insights you've been able to derive from what I assume is pretty in-depth study, but still brief on a time course of a year. So bravo on that, absolutely. And I actually had a question to your point about the way the founding fathers structured the government. Did you get that from a source, or I mean, just because it's a very profound insight, I never really heard it put that way. What was your source for that, or did you was that an insight you derived on your own?
It's just Declaration of Independence, and you compare it to what I did was that I went through this. There is something called the Great Books program, which and they've got something called the Syntopicon, which summarize what everybody throughout the Western intellectual history has said about the topics. That's the best place where they place this idea in contrast with all the ideas that were there. I don't want to go too off topic here because that's not the topic. Basically, the idea of before that was that of a benevolent king. Everybody was looking for a benevolent king. And what founding fathers did was that they changed that and saying that each person, the power flows bottom up, not top down.
Fantastic. Okay. Even gets down to the sovereignty of each person that I think is sort of in the Constitution, the right to privacy, the right to your own property, the right to protect yourself from unreasonable search and seizure. That all kind of plays into, you substitute the word sovereignty with divinity, that it's that in being made of the image of God, we are deserving of at least some sort of sacred protected rights that we all just, and the way it works is because we can all agree on that, and without arguing too much about it. Like it's the presupposition that we all can have as established reality, that we can then move on to a greater, more detailed system of courts and justice. And
thank you. Jason, I don't want to go too much into politics. Anyway, I just gave that as the example to kind of show this. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I just, yeah, really
Okay.
appreciate you bringing that up, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's it.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
I
much.
was just giving that as a way of a parallel example to show the change. It's almost like a Copernican revolution, moving from, sun being, Earth being the center to the sun being the center. Next up is going to be Evanique and Gary. Evanique.
Yeah, just really quickly. Something Joe said about self-conscious and being aware of self. I think that is one of the things I could say I really did. It really did blow my mind. And I think because as a Christian, you don't think that way in terms of self. It almost has this air of selfishness, of thinking about self. And I think when you study something like this with 52 living ideas, it brings that new concept in, and you realize that it's been about that all along. In the Bible, you just didn't hear it that way. You just didn't see it that way. And the one thing I can say is that somebody said it earlier, like you have to know yourself, or you have to know oneself in order, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, in order to know God. And it never clicked to me before, and it's still clicking, and that's why I'm still absorbing a lot of it. But I think when you get to know yourself, you're getting to know the center of who you are, you're getting to know the Holy Spirit, and you're therefore getting to know God. And if we are all divine and human, we have to get to know ourselves in order to know God, because we are a part of God. Just like Jesus showed us how we're a part of God when he came in human form. And I think you said it, Shrikant, excuse me, about the diamond, the diamond being matter, and, Jesus being the light, and that combination of light and matter is like Jesus coming down to this earth. I thought that was amazing. That's why I'm like, I really have to go back and make sure I really got it all, because I don't think I fully got it, but it was an amazing presentation. And one of the beautiful things that you do, Shrikant, is that you make people think. And I wouldn't even worry about being biblically on point. The simple fact that you have these meetups and you are willing to accept correction, that's what makes the presentations great. Not that they're perfect, but that they make you think, and you can see yourself in these presentations. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Evanique. I mean, the thing is that I am, and this is true for all these books that we are studying, whether it is Gospel of John or Bhagavad Gita. I mean, I feel that these things are so deep and so rich that every time I go back to them, I read the same, I must have read Gospel of John hundreds of times. And every time I read it, there is new things that I see. And it's like, I feel, what kind of an ocean is this? I've been trying to go deep, but there is just so much more there. That is the feeling I have. And I realize that, I'm just saying that, look, whatever I'm doing, I still see that there is just so much there. And it's so beautiful and so beautifully integrated that pieces of it connect together. Pieces of it connect together in such a marvelous way. I mean, even within the gospel itself, and forget about its connection with the Old Testament. I mean, that is another, like, a huge field. And so the way I see it is that it's like the diamond, right? You have all this light, and you have just this sense of wonder of saying, what is this light doing, and how is it doing it, and how many colors there are, and how do they keep changing, and how it's just, so that is the feeling that I have. And so I just wanted to say that. Thank you. I would really appreciate the compliments, Evanique. Next up is Gary. Gary.
Yeah, thank you. We were talking about the whole idea of like the kings and the people wanting a Messiah, divine king. And for me, it blew me away. Like historically, we know that in 70 AD, John's writing after the Romans came in and just destroyed the temple and leveled it. And 30 years after John writes, another person claims to be Messiah, this guy Simon Bar Kokhba, and leads a Jewish revolt that's so huge that I think 1.5 Roman legions were killed in all of this. And then when Rome finally quelled this rebellion, they genocided everybody in the area, just like everybody is dead and the entire nation was scattered. So it just kind of draws like to that point. I was like, what exactly do we want? And so in retrospect, I was then thinking about Joe. He made a really profound point on the position or the situation or the aspect of reason. And that's like what it means to think ethically. You brought this up with King Solomon. He didn't ask, what do I do? He said, teach me the wisdom so that I can figure out what to do. And in my paper, I'm exploring the ethics of the Gospel of John. And that's really what it's about, is a method of thinking about the world so that we can answer those questions. It's not a rule book telling us what to do. It's kind of a guide in teaching us how to think so that we can understand the world and engage in this moral reasoning, which then, finally just kind of leads back to that last thing, is like looking away at the world, and just looking at trying to find satisfaction in the things of the earth, and how that's just always going to come up dead. And so like looking to the light, that's the beauty of the whole thing in John 1, when he talks about, to anyone who would receive him, he gave them the right to be called the sons of God. And the whole idea of the sons there, it's not so much of a gender thing, is that you have inherited all things. He owns it. He created the whole world. And so here we are looking for these things. We want a physical king. We ignore the fact that we're going to be decimated or whatever else it is. But if we will look to the light, then the one who created all that is going to make us his son, and all things are there. We are truly free. And so I just loved, all of those were kind of like, in my mind, were brought back together.
Thank you, Gary. Penny, do you have any comment on John 1 and the discussion, and any thoughts?
No, it's been a great discussion. The one thing that has popped into my mind was, is, there's this song they teach little kids when they're in Bible school and stuff, and it's "This Little Light of Mine." I kept thinking of that song then, and actually how much more profound it is in a way than what you think, because it's like, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, hide it under a bushel. No, I'm going to let it shine. And just thinking, that light, that internal light, the reflection of Jesus' light and God's light, and shining that light out into the world, kind of like you had your diamond. And I just kept playing that song in my head and just thinking, wow, this is really a pretty good song to teach children.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? I mean, it's a beautiful example, because actually these deep things are very simple. At the root of it, it's very, very simple. And actually children, their heart is actually open. So they get some of these things very directly and very simply. So that's a beautiful example. Thank you. And in some ways, Jesus is like that. He's making things accessible to you. He's making things accessible in so many different ways. It's the other thing I love about this is the integration. It is the integration of actions. You can see the actions of Jesus. You can hear the words, and you can feel the emotions. And all of them come together that allow you to intuit or move towards God. It's like three-pronged way of moving towards God. So beautiful. Thank you. All right, folks. So we're going to continue next time with, back to chapter 13. I think we're going to do verses 33 to 35. This was just wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is, it's really, really, I'm really grateful to have so many great people here and all the comments. So really appreciate it. Thank you, folks. We'll see you next time. Oh, I have to tell you, folks, some incredible meetups coming up. We've got tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the divine feminine. I'm going to get Evanique to talk about it a little bit. So that's number one. Number two, Saturday at 11 a.m., Yasuhiko Kimura is going to be back. And his topic is that of a fourfold mind, specifically focusing on age of imagination, role of imagination in human life. And then on Sunday, we're going to have a presentation by Mark Stallman on three spheres. It's the fourth in the series of lectures, introductory lectures of Trivium University. They're, I'm just honored that they're launching this university here on 52 Living Ideas. These are the introductory lectures. It's a profound topic. So, I hope you can make all three. Evanique, Evanique, do you want to give a quick preview of tomorrow?
Sure, unless Brian wants to, or is Brian there, Penny?
Yeah, let's call Brian also. Is Brian there, Penny? Nope.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh wait, she's.
So, okay, all three of you, whoever wants to speak, go ahead. Evanique, and then Penny, and then Brian. Go ahead.
So this is kind of like the second part of what we did last month, which is discovering how the divine feminine was, or how and why the divine feminine was removed from the Western culture. And this time, Brian is going to be going over the Iron Age in terms of the Jewish tradition. I forget the years that are going to be covered, but he has an extensive and well thought out presentation on and well researched presentation on what happened to the divine feminine in the Western world and the Jewish culture. And he's going to be using the Bible and two other sources, two other books primarily to go over it. And we're all in this discovery period, this discovery together. And I did get a chance to look at his presentation, and it's fascinating. So please come out if you can. It'll be great. Penny, do you have anything to add?
No, I just think it's a really incredibly interesting topic, and until we started reading these books, I didn't. It never had occurred to me, about the divine feminine and how, the Jewish religion really was fighting against the beliefs in Canaan and that area, and they really wanted to suppress the religions that were there, and the steps that they took to do it ended up, suppressing women too, as well as the religion.
Just one more important thing of note. You can see it throughout the Old Testament. Religions that were primarily led by females were quite like, in the Bible, it talks about taking down the Asherah poles and destroying everything. Like every religion that was led by a woman was seen as evil and had to be destroyed and burned down. And if you, as a Jewish person, were to even associate with people that had like a worship of divine feminine, like if they were a part of that, they were to be destroyed. So it's going to be a fascinating topic
All right.
on so many different levels.
Okay, folks, I want to do one more thing here, because this topic of divine feminine has come up that we're going to discuss tomorrow, and this integration between spirit and matter that I talked about today. So I want to bring in something from the Indian tradition on this. This is actually a work of Nyaneshwar. He is a 13th century figure, contemporary of Aquinas. And this is it's a longish poem. It's a longish poem. It'll probably take me about 10 minutes to read it. So I did a version of it in the Gita Meetup, but then I was not satisfied because it was an English translation. So this is something that I have myself translated from Marathi. But I've just tried to get the meaning right. I've not tried to get the poetry right. So this is a very rough version, rough translation from Marathi into English. So I'm going to read this. Let me give you a quick introduction. I'm going to use the term Shiva Shakti. Shiva is the god Shiva, who is the center. And Shakti actually means power. And it also means the consort of Shiva. So in a sense, it is the power, it's God's power. It also means God and goddess together. Okay. So as power of God, it is one thing, but as God and goddess, it's two things. So it goes between 1 and 2. So I'm just going to read it. All pervading Shiva Shakti, or power of Shiva, starts with an invocation. I begin by paying my respects to my teacher, blissful Nivruttinath, who is my refuge. This knowledge of the power of Shiva is the greatest and most blissful of all knowledge. It is overflowing with compassion and grace. I glorify it and worship it. Advaita, that is non-dual, means in spite of being one integrated whole, creating an impression of separateness or duality. Shiva Shakti, in spite of being only one, creates an illusion of being two. That is why it is difficult to tell which part is Shiva and which part is Shakti. Shiva Shakti is the root of the world. They show us the fundamental principle of the soul, which is one. For the sake of understanding their principle, I worship them. Shiva is the beginning, existence, and destruction of the world. Where these three end or come together, there is completeness. I worship this all-encompassing, complete Shiva. This chapter is on all-pervading nature of Shiva Shakti. Its oneness is described. Nyaneshwar says, Shiva Shakti are the parents of this world. They do not have any name. They are the root of the world, and I worship them. They are both father and mother. They keep changing their forms as it pleases them. In the passion of their love for each other, they intermingle with each other. Then no duality remains. But thereafter, in order to express their love for each other, they separate. They both exist and do not exist as separate beings. But without being two, they cannot express their love for each other. So they, in spite of being one, create an illusion of being two. How can we understand their true nature? They so love to engage in their own bliss that they, in spite of being two, are one. They do not depart from their oneness, even in jest. They're so afraid of parting from each other that in spite of creating this massive child, the universe, they do not even step away from each other. Both lovingly gaze at the entire world they have jointly created, but do not let a third come into being and touch their bliss. Both have the same rights. Both shine with the same radiance. From eternity, both have been living happily with each other. Difference tried on its own to seek duality. But he too, the difference too, ashamed, gave up and lost himself in the sweetness of oneness. Because of Shiva, Shakti becomes complete. And without Shakti, there is no Shiva. How can one describe their oneness? Both are dear as life to one another. What kind of a union is this? They are so vast that this world cannot contain them. Yet they dwell happily in the smallest atom. Without each other, they do not even make even a blade of grass. In this universe spanning family, only two live, Shiva and Shakti. When Shiva sleeps, his beloved Shakti does the work of both of them. She's awake even in the midst of her sleep. This entire world is Shakti's creation, which Shiva sees as a dream while he sleeps. If Shiva awakens, the dream is destroyed and the world ends. If Shakti stops creating the world, Shiva awakens and the world ends. Shiva and Shakti both unite their duality into oneness. Only for the sake of playing with each other, they become separate into two halves and exhibit duality. Therefore, their male-female distinction is in name only. Both together are Shiva alone. In the whole universe, there is only Shivaness. In spite of this, Shiva Shakti are in everything half and half. Two sticks, one sound. Two flowers, one fragrance. Two lamps, but one light. Two lips, but one story. So two Shiva and Shakti, but one universe. In spite of being two, they produce just one universe. In this manner, in spite of being two, since time eternal, they have been enjoying the same one bliss. Shakti, being devoted to her husband, cannot do anything without her Lord. And Shiva, in spite of being all-powerful, cannot do anything without his Shakti. Who is Shiva and who is Shakti? It's very difficult to distinguish. We cannot grasp their nature. Sugar and its sweetness, camphor and its fragrance. Anyone who tries to distinguish them is confused and lost. If you try to catch all the light coming from a lamp, you will grasp the light, you will grasp the lamp in your hand. So when you try to obtain Shakti, you obtain Shiva. Sun's beauty is in its radiance. Source of radiance is the sun. Likewise, without any distinctions, Shiva Shakti are splendid in their beauty. From its reflection, you can recognize a thing. So from their duality, you can understand their oneness. Shiva, Purusha, shapeless, without any qualities, is the husband of Shakti. She derives all her power from the power of her husband. Because of Shiva, Shakti obtained its existence. She, due to whom Shiva submerges his Shivaness and manifests in life-giving Shakti. In the creation of the world, Shakti is the richness and power of Shiva. She carries the entire responsibility of creation. Shy that her husband is without form, she decorates herself gloriously, taking on all the names and forms in the universe. Where there is paucity of oneness, she shows the fecundity of her myriad play of forms. Through her work, she demonstrates the greatness of her husband to the world. And the husband, while remaining in the background, makes his wife famous and revered in the eyes of the world. The husband is the seer. When he does not see his wife, he becomes dejected. The myriad creations of Shakti are a feast for the awareness of Shiva. Shiva relishes this feast produced by Shakti and is satiated by them. While Shiva is asleep, Shakti creates everything in the world. This child, the universe, is produced by Shakti without active participation of Shiva. So this child does not recognize his own father. Shiva is invisible to this child. Roles of both Shiva and Shakti are carried out by Shakti herself. Without Shakti, Shiva cannot experience bliss. Shakti is the body of Shiva, and Shiva is the principle of Shakti. Both delight in each other. Just like the wind and its speed, gold and its luster is one. So also with Shakti, there is Shiva as they pervade the world. With musk, there is its fragrance. With fire, there is its heat. So with Shiva, so with Shakti, there is always Shiva. When approaching the sun, day and night disappear. Just like that, duality between Shiva and Shakti disappears when you approach them. Shiva Shakti are beyond the primordial sound Om, from which the creation of the world took place. This world, generated by words, having eaten a feast of duality, can be seen as being one in Shiva Shakti. Jnaneshwar bows to this world-creating couple of Shiva Shakti. All language is frozen when attempting to describe Shiva Shakti. Just like at the time of deluge, there is water everywhere. There is no distinction between a river and the sea. During a storm, wind becomes one with the speed, merges with the sky, and in the bright radiance, sun can't be seen. Just like that, while observing Shiva Shakti, the seer and his sight merges with them. It is this all-pervading Shiva Shakti, spanning inside and outside in the home and the world, that I worship. They are a flow such that without climbing into it, you cannot drink its water. If I were to try to bow down to this inseparable Shiva Shakti while being separate from them, I would only be claiming duality. Just as gold ornaments do not become ornaments by being apart from the gold, I do not worship them by being separate from them, but by being of them. When the tongue speaks the word tongue, what is the difference between the tongue and the word tongue? When a river merges into the ocean, there is no male-female difference between them. Both their water is merged Is there duality in water? Even when the sun considers itself as the source of light and light itself, is its oneness lost? When starlight falls on the moon, is the moon's own light reduced? Does it need a second light to look for its own light? The luster of pearl does not hide it, but accentuates its beauty. Just because Om has three constituent sounds, U, and M, is its oneness lost? Without impairing its oneness, if beauty can be achieved, why should water not delight in the fragrance of flowers floating on its waves? That is why, not regarding Shiva Shakti as separate from me, I worship them. After moving aside the mirror, the reflection is absorbed into the original thing. When the wind stops, waves merge back into the ocean, becoming one with it. When you wake up, you're aware of your own self. Similarly, waking up from the dream of my intellect, I worship Shiva Shakti. Only after giving up the desire of saltiness can salt merge into the ocean. So giving up my ego, I have merged into Shiva Shakti. When you remove layer after layer of the bark of the banana tree, the air in it merges into the sky. So have I worshipped and merged into Shiva Shakti. Thank you, folks. If you have any thoughts, any comments, you're welcome to make them. Joe.
Well, that was beautiful, and thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I couldn't help but think about the relationship between the Father and the Son, and how the Father makes the Son and the Son makes the Father, in that same kind of relationship that we were talking about. And that how they're one in the same, and essentially that relationship doesn't exist until one comes into being. So anyway, I saw some parallels between that and in the beginning was the Word. I mean, in the relationship between God and His Son. That was amazing. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Really appreciate that. Next up is Evanique.
Joe stole what I was going to say. But the one thing I wanted to add is that everything Joe said, and that the Holy Spirit, the way I see it, if you look at the Trinity, that's the love, right? That's this, like the Holy Spirit has always been spirit, it's never been in the form. So that's the love between the Father and the Son. And if you think about it like that, and they share, and Jesus shares that with us, He is sharing His love for His Father with us, which is a beautiful thing. And one final thought I had was that, those two, made the universe, and so did Jesus and God. They made it's so many parallels. So thank you so much. I remember that story that you did in the Gita meetup, and it means more even now after this meetup. So thank you for reading that again.
Well, thank you, Evanique. So what I want to say is that the core idea here, I mean, the reason I wanted to recite this today is that really the core idea is that of oneness of spirit and matter, of form and function. This is the Aristotelian way of thinking as opposed to Platonic way of thinking. This is the integrated way of thinking as opposed to the dualistic way of thinking. The modern world, it is bifurcated. There is a material world and there is the spirit. There is mind and matter, which are separate from each other. It's profoundly wrong way of looking at the world. What this is, what we're seeing in Gospel of John and what we are seeing here in this, in Bhagavad Gita, and this is the most concentrated version that I've seen so far of the Advaita philosophy of Gita, is that oneness. And it is the God, the world, you can think of it here, the rough parallel would be God, world, and you have two things going. One is that you have the sun going this way from God to the world, shaping the world. And then you have the Holy Spirit coming back from the world to God. And you have this entire cycle going on continuously. And whenever you are, so it's one thing. It's one thing together. So it's really, really beautiful. So thank you. Gary, what do you think? This is Indian philosophy.
No, I really like it. What stood out to me is how you were talking about the different philosophies and how it's really kind of a consequence of our post-enlightenment modernity, that everything has to be in discrete categories. And so even like looking at the divine feminine is, from our perspective, we have a hard time like we're looking at it as these discrete categories even in there, and so it's going to be a difficult thing or a fun thing to stretch our minds to imagine how it was captured, in the iron one, or pre-iron age, or how it was conceptualized there. And for me, I'm kind of excited about like the idea of Jesus reclaiming that, and that's kind of what I think is going on. If I've tried to explain it ever so poorly with the logos idea, is that these things are not all discrete, is that so many different traditions are being brought together, and Jesus is kind of encapsulating all of them. He's not one or the other. So yeah, I love it. I love what you had to say there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary. So Jason, this is a translation that I have just done, and it's very rough. I still need to work on it. So I have used a Marathi translation done by Nanish, of Naneshwari, which, see, Naneshwari was written in 13th century Marathi, and my 13th century Marathi is not that good. I can read like maybe 80%, something like that, of that. But for that, I need like a Marathi translation along with it. So now I'm going to do the hard work of actually reading the original one, like word by word, before I, kind of produce the, reasonable translation. But thank you, Jason. Really, really appreciate that. All right, folks. So this is so incredible meetup. I just love it. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Good night.